They told a military mom to sit in the back, but what her son did next stopped everyone in the room cold. It was a warm Sunday morning in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of day when the sunlight filters through the oak trees just right, soft and golden. Emily Carter had dressed carefully for the town hall meeting, navy blue slacks, a white blouse, and a pin with the Marine Corps emblem on her collar. She wasn't one to draw attention to herself, but that pin meant something. Her son, Corporal Ryan Carter, had served 2 tours overseas and had just returned home a month ago. Quiet, humble, and precise. Traits he'd picked up in the Marines. Ryan never talked much about what he'd seen, but he always made sure his mother knew she was the reason he stayed grounded. The town hall was buzzing when Emily walked in. It was a community event open to everyone. Veterans, families, local business owners. The front rows were filling up quickly. Emily stepped forward, looking for an open seat. That's when a volunteer in a red lanyard, a teenager maybe 19, waved at her with a polite but dismissive smile. "Ma'am, the front is reserved. You can sit in the back section, please." Emily blinked. "I'm a military mother. I thought veterans and their families." "I understand, but those are for VIP guests," the volunteer interrupted, already turning to help someone else. Emily hesitated, her fingers brushing the Marine pin. It wasn't about the seat. It was about something deeper. A quiet recognition she'd hoped the town would show. Not just to her, but to all the families who'd held their breath through deployments and late-night calls. Still, without saying a word, she turned and walked toward the back rows. Unnoticed by most, Ryan had arrived just minutes before. He'd taken a seat in the corner, a little out of the way like he always preferred. His cap was pulled low, and he didn't wear his dress blues, just a plain collared shirt and jeans. But his eyes had caught everything. The way the volunteer dismissed his mom. The way people who didn't know her story got better seats just because they were on a list. Ryan stood up, slow and steady, and walked toward the front without a word. Every step was calm but deliberate. No one noticed him at first until he stepped onto the stage. He didn't grab the mic, didn't make a scene. He looked straight at the mayor, then turned to face the crowd. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "But before this meeting continues, there's something I think everyone here should see." The room went quiet. People leaned forward. The mayor's eyes narrowed, confused but curious. Ryan took a slow breath. Then, without fanfare, he turned and walked off the stage, toward the back. He stopped in front of his mother's seat, bent slightly and held out his hand. "Mom," he said softly, but clearly enough for the room to hear. "You don't sit in the back. Not today." And then, in front of everyone, he led her down the aisle. As Ryan guided his mother toward the front, the room seemed to hold its breath. The soft click of Emily's heels on the floor echoed through the hushed town hall. People turned in their seats, unsure whether to stand or stay quiet, caught between politeness and curiosity. Emily looked up at her son, her lips pressed together, eyes glistening, but she didn't say a word. She simply followed him. The mayor, a well-meaning but sometimes disconnected man in his 50s, stepped forward, adjusting his tie as if trying to catch up with the moment. "Son, he started, but Ryan raised one hand. Not rudely, just enough to pause the conversation. "I'm not here to cause a scene," Ryan said calmly. "I respect this town. I grew up here. I played football in that field behind the school, got stitches at Dr. Pearson's clinic, helped sandbag the riverbanks when it flooded, but there's something off about the way we recognize people." He glanced around the room, his tone steady. "My mom's not just a military mom. She's the reason I came home in one piece. You see someone who raised a Marine. I see someone who spent nights praying over folded flags she never received, who mailed care packages like they were medicine, who kept going, even when she was afraid." Emily gently squeezed his arm as if to tell him that was enough, but Ryan continued. "Not to embarrass, not to lecture, just to remind. We've got seats reserved for VIPs, for donors, for people in suits. But sometimes the real VIPs walk, and quietly, with calloused hands and tired eyes, and they get sent to the back." There was a murmur in the audience. Not loud, not disruptive, just reflective. The mayor cleared his throat and nodded once. You're right. You're absolutely right. He motioned to the front row where a space had opened up as a few people, clearly moved, stood and offered their seats without hesitation. Ryan looked at them, then turned to his mother. Would you like to sit, Mom? Emily smiled for the first time that morning. Not just a polite smile, but one that came from somewhere deep, like something had finally been put right. Only if you sit next to me, she replied. So they did. Together. The meeting resumed, but something had changed in the air. People listened more closely. Questions were asked with more thought. Even the mayor, when discussing city matters, referenced the people who carry the heart of this town on their backs like our military families. It wasn't dramatic, just different. As the meeting wrapped up, a woman in the row behind leaned forward and tapped Emily on the shoulder. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, for raising someone like him. Emily nodded, a little surprised but grateful. Ryan didn't say much after that. He wasn't looking for applause. He'd just seen something that needed fixing, and fixed it, in the way Marines are trained to do. No spotlight, no speeches, just action. As they stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, Emily looked up at her son and said softly, You didn't have to do that, you know. I know, Ryan replied, helping her down the steps. But I couldn't not. He opened the car door for her, and as they pulled away, neither of them noticed the volunteer from earlier watching them from the doorway, looking not embarrassed, but thoughtful, like something had just begun to click. Later that evening, the small town of Charleston buzzed in ways it didn't often do. The town hall moment had quietly slipped onto social media. Someone in the audience had recorded it on their phone and posted a short clip with the caption, A Marine stood up for his mom today and reminded us what real honor looks like. By dinner time, the video had already gathered thousands of views. By the next morning, it had crossed into the millions. Ryan had no idea. He was back at his old job at a local auto repair shop, changing brake pads on a dusty pickup truck when his phone started vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, messages. Some from people he hadn't heard from in years. Old high school classmates, fellow Marines, even a few journalists. He ignored most of it, assuming it would die down. He didn't like the attention. He hadn't done anything extraordinary, not in his eyes, but the rest of the country seemed to think otherwise. By the time Emily walked into the small grocery store on Main Street that afternoon, people were already greeting her differently. The cashier, a young man who'd barely nodded to her before, now offered to carry her groceries out. A local bakery placed a small American flag and a handwritten thank you note in her bag of fresh rolls. Everywhere she went, someone said, Saw the video, or your son's a good man, or simply you deserved that seat. Still, Emily remained humble, always replying with a soft, Thank you, that means a lot, and never letting the conversation drift too far into the spotlight. But things were changing, slowly and steadily. A week later, a letter arrived, official-looking, with a return address from Washington, D.C. Emily opened it slowly at the kitchen table while Ryan poured coffee across from her. Inside was a neatly typed invitation from the Department of Defense, requesting their presence at a recognition ceremony at Arlington, one that honored not just active service members, but the families behind them. Ryan blinked at the letter. That's unexpected. Emily looked up. Did you know anything about this? He shook his head. No idea. They weren't the only ones curious. The next day, the mayor personally called to ask if they'd be willing to attend a local Veterans Day event as guests of honor. Ryan hesitated, but Emily answered for both of them. We'd be honored, she said gently, her voice calm and clear. The event was held in the high school auditorium. Rows of folding chairs, red, white, and blue banners hung along the walls. A brass band from the neighboring county played softly in the background as people filed in. Ryan wore a pressed shirt and slacks, but no uniform. Emily wore the same Navy outfit from that first town hall, with the Marine pin still fixed proudly at her collar. Before the ceremony started, the mayor pulled Ryan aside backstage. "You know," he said with a sheepish smile, "I've been doing this job over 15 years. But that day, that moment between you and your mom, it taught me something I should have understood a long time ago." Ryan glanced toward the curtain, where Emily sat patiently in the front row. "She doesn't want a spotlight." "I know," the mayor said. "But sometimes people like her need to be in it. If only so the rest of us remember who's been holding this country up from behind the scenes." As the ceremony began, a hush fell over the crowd. And when the speaker introduced Emily Carter, the mother of a Marine who reminded us all what respect really looks like, she stood slowly, accepting the small plaque they handed her. Not with grand gestures, just a warm, grateful nod. And, somewhere in the audience, a woman who had once told Emily to sit in the back was now standing, applauding the loudest. The days that followed felt surreal to Emily and Ryan, like a chapter unfolding they never meant to write. The video continued to circulate, not with headlines about outrage or drama, but with quiet reverence. People called it the moment America needed. Veterans from across the country sent handwritten letters. A school in Illinois played the clip during an assembly about respect. Even a major news outlet requested a short interview, but Emily politely declined. "This isn't about us," she told Ryan as they sat on the porch one evening, the sun casting long orange shadows across the lawn. "It's about something bigger." Ryan nodded, sipping from a chipped coffee mug. "Yeah, but sometimes the bigger things start small." Still, the invitations kept coming. Churches, schools, community centers, all asking them to speak, to share their story. Emily resisted at first, not out of fear but humility, but one request changed her mind. A small community college just an hour away wanted her to speak to a group of young single mothers, some of whom had children in the military. "This one feels different," she told Ryan, showing him the email, so they went. The room was modest, plastic chairs, a squeaky microphone, and a coffee table with store-bought cookies. But the women in the room sat forward in their seats with wide, searching eyes. Some held notebooks. One wore a Navy mom sweatshirt. Another clutched a photo of her son, still in boot camp. Emily didn't use notes. She just told the truth. "I'm not a hero," she began, her voice steady. "I'm a mother who worried through every second of her son's deployment. I'm a woman who learned to be strong so someone else could be braver than me." She paused, letting the words settle. "When they told me to sit in the back, I didn't take it personally. I thought, this is just how things are. But that day my son reminded me of something I forgot, that sometimes the quiet people have the loudest stories." The room stayed silent afterward, not because they had nothing to say, but because they needed a moment. One woman finally spoke, voice cracking. "I didn't know we were allowed to be proud like that." Emily smiled, soft and understanding. "You always were. Sometimes the world just needs reminding." That day marked a turning point, not of fame or recognition, but of purpose. Back home, Ryan began writing in a journal again, something he hadn't done since before deployment. Not combat notes or mission entries, but memories. Small things. Conversations with his mom. What it felt like to come home. The look on her face when he took her hand that day in the town hall. He didn't know exactly why he was writing. Maybe to remember. Maybe to heal. Or maybe because part of him realized that their story wasn't finished. It was only just beginning to echo in the lives of others. And while Emily never sought attention, people started to notice how she carried herself. Graceful, quiet, but never small. At the diner, they'd ask for her opinion. At church, they'd call her up front to offer the closing prayer. Not out of pity, but respect. As fall deepened and the air turned crisp, one last letter arrived. This time from a small town in Iowa, inviting Emily and Ryan to attend a special community appreciation dinner. Not because of the video, not because of a speech, but because a group of high school seniors had watched the clip in class, then decided to host a thank you night for people in their town who'd been overlooked for too long. "We just want to do what Ryan did," the letter read. Make someone feel seen. Emily read the letter twice, eyes welling up. Then she folded it neatly, looked over at her son and said, "Well, what do you think?" Ryan gave a slow, proud smile. "I think we've got somewhere to be." The trip to Iowa wasn't fancy. No flashing lights, no motorcade, just a quiet flight and a rented car that smelled faintly of lemon-scented wipes. Emily and Ryan arrived in the small town of Willow Ridge on a chilly Friday evening. The streets, lined with amber leaves and hand-painted signs that read "Welcome Carter Family." They weren't used to this kind of attention, but there was something warm about it. Sincere. Not hype, just heart. The community center where the dinner was held looked like an old barn that had been cleaned up and given new life. Twinkle, lights strung across wooden beams, long tables covered in checkered cloth, the air thick with the smell of roasted turkey and apple pie. Dozens of people, from elderly veterans to kids barely out of middle school, gathered with excited energy. It wasn't about celebrity. It was about gratitude. A young woman, maybe 17, approached Emily near the entrance. She wore a simple white blouse and held a folded piece of paper in her hand. "Ms. Carter," she said, voice shaking a little. "I'm Lauren. I'm the one who wrote to you. I wanted to thank you in person." Emily smiled gently and reached out. "It's lovely to meet you, Lauren. This place is beautiful." Lauren's eyes lit up. "It's the least we could do." After we watched the video, something changed in our class. We started noticing who wasn't being noticed. Emily tilted her head. "That's a powerful thing to notice." Lauren nodded. "Tonight isn't just about you. It's about every quiet hero in this town. You just reminded us how to look for them." They walked in together. The evening was filled with music and small-town chatter, but something about the energy was different. During the dinner, the students presented handmade awards to local residents. A janitor who had worked 40 years without missing a day, a woman who fostered children for decades, a man who repaired bikes for free on weekends. One by one, they came forward, teary-eyed, receiving standing ovations. Then, near the end of the night, Lauren returned to the microphone. "We also have one more person to thank," she said, her voice steadier now. "Not just for her son's service, but for showing us what quiet courage looks like." She turned toward Emily. "If you hadn't taken that seat, Ms. Carter, none of us would have thought to make more room at the front." The room fell into a silence that wasn't empty. It was full. Emily didn't rush up. She didn't cry. She simply stood, gave a small, graceful nod, and walked slowly to the front. Ryan watched her, arms crossed over his chest, a quiet smile, pulling at the corners of his mouth. Later, as they stood outside beneath a sky full of stars, their breath fogging in the cold, Ryan leaned on the hood of the car and looked over. "You're kind of famous now," he teased gently. Emily chuckled. "Let's not start that rumor." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking, what if we did more of this? More dinners?" she asked, smiling. "No, more showing up. For people. Not in big ways, just noticing." Emily looked at him, the same way she used to when he was 10 and dreaming big. "You think people would listen?" "I think they already are," he said. And as they stood there, side by side under a quiet Iowa sky, neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to, because some moments don't echo through microphones or headlines. Some moments travel heart to heart. Back home in Charleston, the air had shifted, not just in temperature but in spirit. The local newspaper ran a Sunday piece titled, "The Seat at the Front, What One Mother and Son Taught Us." And more than the words, it was the way people acted afterward that told the real story. At the grocery store, Ryan noticed a young teen helping an older man load bags into his car. At the diner, someone insisted a teacher take their place in line. And during a town meeting, when a young mother entered late, juggling 2 kids, 3 people stood at once to give her their seat. No speeches, no announcements, just people remembering, maybe for the first time in a long time, that everyone has a story. Emily received letters daily now. Most were handwritten. One was from a woman in Nebraska. "I lost my son last year. I thought the world had forgotten him. Then I saw you, and I didn't feel invisible anymore. Another came from a teenager. My mom is raising two of us while working nights. She's my hero, and I told her that after watching your story. She cried. Thank you for giving me the words. Ryan kept most of the letters in a shoebox beneath his bed. He didn't open all of them. Some things, he believed, weren't meant to be absorbed all at once. But he held on to each one, understanding, now that what he'd done in that town hall wasn't just a moment of defense. It was a mirror, held up to people who had forgotten what everyday honor looked like. One afternoon, he found Emily on the back porch, thumbing through a small photo album she hadn't touched in years. She glanced up, smiling softly. Remember this? She asked, holding up a picture of him at 17, standing next to his first car, one hand proudly on the hood. Ryan laughed. I thought I was invincible that year. Emily turned the page to a letter he'd written her during deployment. The edges were worn, the ink faded slightly. I used to read this at night when I missed you, she said. He didn't speak right away. The moment felt too sacred for words. Then she added, almost in a whisper, You were always brave, Ryan. But that day in the town hall, it wasn't just bravery. It was kindness. That's the part people remember. He looked down at his hands, rough from years of wrench work, then back at her. I learned it from you. They sat for a while in silence. Then, as the sky turned a soft pink and the first stars began to appear, Ryan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded flyer. They want us to come speak in Atlanta next month. It's a conference on community leadership. Emily raised an eyebrow. You mean they want you to speak? Ryan shook his head. No, us. They said the story doesn't work without both of us. She looked at the flyer, thoughtful. And what would we say? Ryan grinned. Maybe we tell them it's not about doing something grand. It's about seeing who's already doing the quiet work and making sure they don't get pushed to the back. Emily nodded slowly, her gaze lingering on the horizon. All right, she said. Let's go tell them. And just like that, another chapter began, not with a standing ovation or viral video, but with a mother and son stepping into the next room, making space, and offering a simple truth, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is notice. The Atlanta conference was held in a sleek, glass-walled building nestled in the heart of the city. Tall ceilings, polished floors, and rows of chairs arranged with the kind of precision that made everything feel official. But despite the formal atmosphere, Ryan and Emily walked in like they always did, humble, steady, and slightly amused that they'd ended up in a place like this. They weren't used to being keynote speakers. In fact, Emily had spent the flight rereading the invitation 3 times, still unsure how they'd gone from a small-town town hall to a national stage. Ryan, meanwhile, had jotted down a few notes on a yellow legal pad, crossing out most of them before deciding he'd rather just speak from the heart. When they were introduced, the room was filled with leaders, mayors, nonprofit founders, teachers, business owners, people who had given their lives to building up communities. And yet, as Ryan took the mic and looked out over the crowd, there was no nervousness in him. Just calm. My mom raised me to be quiet when I needed to be, and to speak up when it mattered, he began. A while back, we went to a town meeting. Nothing big, just a local gathering. Someone told her to sit in the back, and that didn't sit right with me. Not because she's my mom, but because she's someone who deserves to be seen. Like a lot of people in your towns, people who make things work, quietly, without asking for attention. The audience leaned in, not because the story was dramatic, but because it felt true. Emily joined him a few minutes in. She stood beside him, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, and when she spoke, the room fell into a kind of hush you don't get often. I'm not a public speaker, she said softly, but I am someone who spent most of her life showing up. For my kids, for neighbors, for people who needed a warm meal or a ride to work or someone to sit with at the hospital. And for years, I didn't think any of that mattered much outside of the people I was helping. But now I realize it did. She glanced at Ryan and then back at the crowd. We all have someone in our town like that. Someone who never asks to be in the front but deserves to be there. If our story's done anything, I hope it's reminded people to look around and say, "Hey you, we see you." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was something better. A slow standing wave of quiet, genuine respect. The kind that came from people who'd spent decades trying to do the same kind of quiet good, and finally felt understood. Afterward, people lined up to shake their hands. A mayor from Kansas said he was starting a monthly recognition for unsung citizens. A nonprofit director from Chicago asked if she could quote Emily on a billboard. One woman simply said with tears in her eyes, "I wish my son had spoken up for me like that." That night back at the hotel, Ryan looked out over the city lights from the 14th floor window. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling slowly, through more letters she'd brought with her. "You think we're actually making a difference?" he asked, voice low. Emily didn't look up. "I think we reminded people they can." A few minutes passed before she added, "And Ryan, that's more than enough." He turned toward her, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He thought back, to that first town hall, to the awkward silence after he stood up, to the way the room had shifted. Not because he yelled, but because he noticed. Because he said something. Now here they were, miles from home, making the same quiet shift in rooms, much bigger. The journey hadn't been about going viral or gaining followers. It had been about holding a mirror up to the country and reminding it of something simple, that respect doesn't need permission, and recognition doesn't need a title. As they turned in for the night, Emily smiled one last time. "Let's keep going," she said, "until every back seat is empty."